Now, as part of this session, you will be sharing ideas with other people. So if you feel that you'd like to join a table that's got slightly more people on it, then please feel free. If you're sitting there thinking, oh no, I don't want to talk to the people on my table, I'd prefer to move, then this is your chance. Yeah. So welcome. My name is Nicky. I'm your facilitator for this session. And some of it will be certainly building on from the sharings of Michelle this afternoon. So the session is entitled Women of Influence. And I guess the first thing is, who are the women of influence and why does it matter? Yeah, so we'll have a little bit of an exploration of, from a New Zealand focus, who has been recognised as a woman of influence and why does it matter, and why does it matter to us and where we work, but also why does it matter in terms of women coming through any organisation. What qualities make the difference to the impact that you create? So what are we talking about when we think about you being an effective influencer? And I think from the perspective of why it matters, what is it that you want to influence? What is the difference that you want to make? I've been involved in Auckland, certainly last year, with one of the global women's programs, Breakthrough Leaders. And at the end of it, the women get to share what it is they took from the program. And I can put my hand on my heart and say that every single woman, part of what they wanted to do was to have a greater social impact on the culture in the organizations that they worked in. So my hope is at the end of this session that you're a little bit clearer on what your skills are and why it matters, but also a little bit clearer on what is the difference that you want to make. And I think when we heard Michelle speak this morning, it's about what are the conversations I need to have and with whom, and what gives me permission to have those conversations. So when are you at your best, and how do you maximize your presence and energy? I've incorporated into this because if you're going to be an effective influencer, yet we need to be aware of what it is that fuels me to be my best, whether that's physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually in terms of why am I doing what I'm doing, and how do I maintain a calm presence? How do I influence when people have got a different style to me? And how do I stay in a mindset that is solution-focused rather than fear what the result might be if I spoke out and had the courage to put on the table what I'd like to really say? So Ken Blanchard, you know, we've heard this quote many, many times. The key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. How many of you are influencing others in your roles? Quick show of hands. I'd imagine, yep. So let's think about then what we actually mean by influence and why it matters. And what is it as a woman that we need to think about perhaps differently to if we were a man, if there are any differences? Now, looking at the plethora of leadership books aimed at women, there seems to be an impression that we do need something different. Yeah, there are any number of thousands of books, whether it's biographies or whether it's how we influence more effectively or how women get to the top. How do we do that from a place of authenticity? So let's have a look at some of the statistics from a New Zealand perspective. I'm not going to read them out. I think we're all able to read these for ourselves. These are in the workbook, so don't feel that you have to make copious notes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share them with you, and then let's have a little bit of a discussion around what does that feel like, and what are your thoughts on that? So we've got statistics, but we've got to look at those from the perspective of what does that mean. So Irma is a satirist and a writer in America, but I think sometimes we've got to keep it in perspective, haven't we? If we looked at those statistics and we focused on those, how do we feel? Perhaps a bit disillusioned. You know, if I think about the intent behind Global Women, it was to increase the number of women in senior roles and on boards. Have we succeeded? No. But what are we doing? We're creating dialogue, and we're starting to think about what is the difference we want to make, and how do we have conversations. And from my personal perspective, I think some of those conversations do need to include men, because often it's a systems issue, isn't it? It's all very well developing courage, and it's all very well knowing what I want to make a difference around, but if I haven't got support, and I haven't got people who can open doors and provide mentorship and support me on that journey, it's going to be a much harder struggle. So let's have a think about what are the attributes when we look at the Westpac Women of Influence Awards that the judges are looking for. What they're looking for is personal, academic, professional, and community achievements. Yeah, so it's holistic. It's not just what we're doing in the workplace. Demonstrated performance in their chosen field. Collaboration with or beyond their field. And a wider circle of influence rather than a direct role. Now, so part of what we'll explore in this session is, who do you need to build relationships with? You know, if we go back to some of the work of Cialdini, who was an influential writer in this field, he says one of the key things we need to recognize is that people will buy into us and our ideas if they like us. Yeah, so one of the questions is, who do I need to get to like me? Yeah, people will buy into ideas if we have done something already for them. So the reciprocity principle, where can I provide service or support for others before I need anything from them? You know, it's that generosity of, how do I reach further than the immediate field that I'm focusing on? Has the influence that they've contributed to had a wider impact in terms of women's social and economic advancement? And involvement and contribution to New Zealand communities through collaboration and mentoring. And the extent to which their contribution was innovative. How many of you are aware that Westpac does a Women of Influence Awards? Has anybody in their organisation entered? Yeah?
Stacey was speaking today as well last year.
Oh, fantastic. So what was it, Stacey? Where's Stacey? Oh. Okay. We'll catch her later. But you know, these were the winners last year. Yeah, and in terms of who have we got as our winners, we have Joan with us. Some of you will have heard of Joan. She's a very prominent person in New Zealand in terms of her contribution. She's contributed a lot to board and management. We've got Linda Jenkinson, who got the award for Business Enterprise. And her contribution was very much in the entrepreneurial impact she was having globally. Frances Valentine, an education futurist. So the wide field of women that were represented was fabulous, whether it was arts and culture, whether it was innovation, entrepreneurship. You know, and part of it is, how do we draw strength from some of what the women in New Zealand are contributing to? But equally, how do we do that from a place of where we can take small steps and influence in our own environments? I think otherwise we can get overwhelmed. And let's face it, how many of you aren't fully occupied in life currently? So how do we actually have capacity for some of these frameworks where we can start to think about things from a different perspective? Okay, so I'd like you to now think for yourselves. These are just some of the women who've had an influence in my life. I spent 20 years of my life with The Body Shop. Probably the most prominent person who's influenced me has been Anita Roddick, and I have the privilege of having worked with her for 5 years quite closely. So I'm going to give you some time now to reflect and to share on your tables who have been the women who have influenced you. Now, whether that's personally influenced you in terms of family members, whether it's been musicians, whether it's been politicians, and some will influence us in a positive way. I can't say that Margaret Thatcher to me was a positive influence in the 80s, but it certainly raised my awareness of who I was. Yeah. So think for yourselves, who has influenced you, how, and what has the impact of that been on yourselves? And when you've done a little bit of self-reflection, have a chat, people on your table. Why? Why have they had influence? And we'll come back together in 10 minutes. Have we some music we can just, gentle music we can put on, guys? Gentle music. Okay, let's come back together, and maybe if we can think about somebody that you're prepared to share, even if it's just an attribute that came out of your table conversation. Who is it that influences us, and why? What is it they do, or what is it that you took from recognizing the influence that person had on you? And there is a roaming mic for anyone who's courageous enough to share. You've been nominated. Thank you. Is it on? Just check. Yeah, no, it should be on.
We talked about women who have influenced us in positive ways as well as negative ways. So we talked about how there might be women that we've come across that we don't necessarily want to be like, and that can be a different form. But for me personally, the person I talked about was a professor I had at law school who was a very strong female role model, and I'm 5 years in now, and I can still go back to her and talk to her about career choices, and she's supported me on scholarship applications, and I can always go to her for quite frank advice, and I'm probably quite a non-confrontational person, so to get used to that to start off with was quite difficult, but fantastic. It's been really rewarding. So yeah, she's a personal one for me.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
I can probably talk about my women who influenced me because they were in the UK, so hopefully I can speak about their names and not embarrass anyone too much in the legal profession. My first real woman of influence in my professional career was Ruth Goldman, who was the head of the Pensions Litigation Department at Linklaters when I first joined there. I mean, this is going back about 17 years ago now. But she was a mother of 5 and one of the few heads of departments in that firm at the time. As a woman, she was incredibly strong leader, worked horrendous hours. I genuinely don't know if her children ever saw her, but she seemed to be able to juggle both quite admirably. Her husband was a school teacher, so I think he took on more of the full-time carer role, and of course they had a nanny, as many partners and heads of department in the UK did. But what particularly inspired me about Ruth was when I decided to do some pro bono work through the firm. And I joined a Hackney Schools mentoring program and went to the Skinner's Company School for Girls, which was one of the more, I suppose, well, they had a number of different ethnicities based at that school, and for the vast majority of students, English was their second language. And I mentored teenage girls from that school who were very concerned that they would never get to see a law degree, let alone get inside a law firm like Linklaters, which was one of the Magic Circle firms in London. And it was only actually, I got an award after a couple of years of mentoring the same group of girls from the Hackney Schools mentoring team, and it was only then that Ruth came to me and she said, "This means a huge amount to me that someone from my department did this." And she said, "I don't know if you know, Lisa, but that's the school that I went to." And it was the first time because she had this very posh Kent accent, and accents are sort of everything in the UK. They very much, are about kind of where you came from. And I thought it was interesting that her accent had changed over time, but I also thought it was great that she could come out and talk about where she started off. Possibly a little bit disappointed that I never knew that about her before then, but it was great that she shared that with me. For me, she was the first woman that I worked with who just seemed to be able to have it all and actually do it incredibly capably, and that was very inspirational. And then the second one, just very quickly, if I got time, is just to show 2 contrasting women of influence, I suppose. I worked for the Crown Prosecution Service, and Grace Anonwu was my boss for a long time. She's the Chief Crown Prosecutor in the UK. And Alison Saunders was my boss for a little while. She's now the DPP in the UK. And both of them mentored me and told me that I probably, my greatest weakness was probably that I didn't know when to stop working, which is probably true of many of us. And that I needed, Grace famously would sometimes just say to me, "Lisa, you look like shit, go home. You've been in the office too long." And I loved the way that she could talk frankly with me. But I think knowing your own limitations is really important. But I remember Alison Saunders famously coming to my desk one day and saying, Lisa, we've got this huge urgent issue, you need to sort it out, the press are going to be here, we've got an interview happening at 3 p.m. And I just finished saying to my line manager then, I'm about to go home, I've come down with, I think it's norovirus, I feel really ill. And I turned to Alison and said, I can't do it, I'm actually feeling really ill. And she said, yes, you can, Lisa. You know what they say, if you want something done, give it to a busy woman. I'm sure you can fit it in. And it made me think, she's really not listening. And because it's not too often, I think, that we ask for help or we say, actually, no, I can't. And it was something quite pivotal and it stands out. And I remember thinking, Alison, you probably should have just stopped and actually listened. But having said that, she was a very good boss. She was just also a very busy woman who needed things done. And we've all done that.
Great,
so.
thanks, Lisa. And I think that's it, isn't it? It's noticing what we aspire to and what skills we'd really like to take on board, but also what is the impact of communication or the way of someone being that sort of strikes a chord in us or creates a response that we might want to just question around ourselves. Anyone else? An example to share? No? Put this one down now. I think the reality is we are a product of our story, aren't we? If we think about even the concept of unconscious bias, we've all got beliefs that are formed because at some level we've taken on board a message or somebody's told us something and we've fed ourselves that message over and over again. You know, often when I'm running workshops, it's helping us to recognise what are the beliefs that support me and what are the beliefs that hold me back. And when I'm thinking about influencing somebody, what do I need to believe to be effective in having this conversation? Because if I believe I don't have a voice, or I believe that this person is far too important for me to be able to even have the time to have that conversation, then nothing's going to change. Come on, just checking the technology is not causing too much disruption. So thinking about the conversations that you've just shared, let's bring this into the skills then of being an effective influencer. So what I'd like you to continue your conversation around is, what do we mean when we say the skills of being an effective influencer? Yeah, again, short table conversation. I'm only going to give you a couple of minutes. What are some of the skills that enable us to influence somebody else? Enable us to get somebody else to buy into our ideas.
Right. Well, look, we first looked at the skills, and then we honed in on ourselves and how did we influence or did we consciously use any skills? So just as a list, we felt that listening and understanding in terms of immediate influences was really important. And I think the example we heard earlier from Lisa was absolutely opposite to that. Secondly, that we needed to respect the person and their choices and even if we didn't want to follow what they'd done, at least their life path was important. How they modelled behaviour, so their actual behaviour. And also quiet achievers. Some of us felt that they were more impressive than the loud ones who were shouting at the glass ceiling and far more likely to be influencers. So in terms of looking at ourselves and what we might do to influence other people coming up, other young women, we just talked about consciously looking for opportunities and didn't really get beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Who else? Thank you.
Just really following on from something that Christine said, often it's the way that people talk in meetings and present their ideas, and we sort of talked about how ideas needed to be presented in a confident and clear way, so tentative suggestions are often not picked up, and you find that, for example, male speakers will say things in a more confident manner, and that will get picked up even though you may have actually just made the same suggestion sort of 20 minutes beforehand. So that's something that I think it's something that can be learnt, but it's something that we don't always do and don't always think about.
Thank you. And the challenge is often it takes courage to have the confidence. So if we don't practice courage, then often we don't grow in confidence. So, underlying it is some of that sort of emotional, I guess, acceptance that it does mean we're stepping out of our comfort zone quite often. Anyone else got anything they'd like to share? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I also believe it's very important to concentrate on the positives, not the negatives, particularly if you're making a presentation, perhaps wanting work or wanting someone to join you, that you very much concentrate on your positives and what you have to offer, rather than criticising someone that may be competing against you.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? So generally, we find it easier to influence people who think like us. If people have got the same motivators and the same needs and the same communication style and the same values, would you generally agree that they're easier to get to buy into our ideas? So often the challenge is when we've got people who are different to us, not to get into the habit of labeling them as difficult. They're not difficult, they're just different. Therefore, influencing is how do I understand what the other person needs in terms of evidence or benefits or at times consequences to buy into what it is I'm proposing from their perspective. Does that make sense? Because I think, human nature is that we will share what we would need to say yes. So a large part of influencing is what do I need to understand about the other person so that I'm aware of what they need to be able to buy into the suggestion that I am making. And that takes a lot of self-awareness and at times self-regulation. Yeah? Because managing our emotional state becomes really key to be confident or to be seen as being confident. Yeah. So what else gets in the way of us being able to effectively influence? Any thoughts?
You touched on our emotions.
Kathy?
Well, you touched on it.
Yeah.
You talked about our emotions. So I've sometimes I can say that occasionally I've been in a meeting and a woman's got quite passionate about something and she's cried, right? She's got so passionate she's cried, and I know that it turns most of the men off. So she wasn't able to control her emotions.
Yeah. Yep. I remember when I was, I took a year out and I travelled. I was heading up training for Body Shop, took a year out, came back, applied for a franchise. And the franchise that I had been offered was up in Scotland, in Stirling. And I'd been up there for a full week doing customer accounts and interviewing other shopkeepers and getting a sense of prospective turnover. Came back and a decision had been made at head office that was no longer available. It was going to go to one of the Scottish franchisees. And I remember sitting in the office and I was just so angry and disappointed. And I did get tearful, and I remember saying to Rob Lamond, who was the franchise manager at the time, don't for 1 minute think I'm upset. I'm just so angry. But it's just that release, isn't it, of emotion that at times we need to find ways to control. So we're going to move on to just getting really clear on some of the research around the skills of effective influencing, but perhaps more importantly, what is it I need to do to be at my best and to manage my state? Let's move through. 5 steps to increase your influence. This is in your handout, but this comes from some research around what is it that we need to be aware of. Well, the first thing is we need to be aware of what is my style. And there is reference to a survey that you can complete yourselves to get clearer on what your approach is. I mean, some of us have a natural style where we will naturally be assertive. We will push through our ideas. Others of us will use much more a convincing approach, evidence-based. For others of us, we'll always go down that more collaborative. And And for some of us, it's about sort of bridging. How do I get people to connect? So understanding our own style, but also understanding our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own beliefs. The raising of self-awareness enables us to be a more effective influencer. Taking stock of the situation. So what we need to be aware of is, who are the people that I need to build relationships with? Not only the decision maker, but who are the key influencers? Who are the key people that the decision maker relies on for their support? And how do I build relationships? Because if you're wanting to influence change, there's a strategic element of it in terms of building a cohort of people who can support you. Identifying our gaps. If we know that we are feeling very passionate about this particular topic, the gap might well be, I know I've needed to take the long picture on this, and I'm needing to actually manage my expectations and not be quite as upfront with this particular audience. So at times, if you're passionate, if you're values-led, how do I think about the long-term change I want to implement, rather than a more sort of slash-and-burn approach which can turn people off? And how do I then develop those skills that I recognise, for me, will make the difference? And most importantly, practice those in an environment where I feel that I can get constructive feedback, where I can feel that there's trust in place. So were there any other skills that you acknowledged were needed in terms of being an effective influencer? Some of the ones that come through, effective influencers ensure that they dedicate themselves to something which has meaning and purpose. It is much easier to influence if you're passionate about what it is you're wanting to influence. If you're wanting to have a conversation around perhaps bringing up the element of how do we get more women to feel that they have a voice in the senior leadership table, then what is it that's driving that in me? Because it takes energy, doesn't it? It takes energy to do something different. They commit themselves to continually bettering themselves, to continual learning and growth. They engage with people openly, honestly, and in mutually beneficial ways. They invest time and energy in what is, but also in what can be. So it's recognizing, what is it that could be the success that we're looking for? So there's any number of different attributes, but I think what comes through when I look at effective influencing and women that have really made a difference is a courage to actually have those first conversations. And courage comes from the heart. So what we're talking about is, how do I be a first-rate version of myself by understanding who I am, what I'm passionate about, and where I can make the difference. So I think this quote from Judy Garland is perfect. Be a first-rate version of yourself instead of a second-rate version of somebody else. So it's taking those attributes and those elements of the people that you recognize that had influence in your lives and aspiring to some of those attributes, but also looking for opportunities of where you can close that gap to be more effective in influencing within your organization or within your community. So in order for that to happen, we need to recognize that passion takes energy. And we can think about energy on 4 dimensions. We can think about energy being physical. So the physical energy that I have will be the quantity of energy. And basically, when we're thinking about physical energy, it'll come down to, what am I eating? Am I getting some exercise? And am I sleeping well? When we think about emotional energy, the quality of the energy that I have between myself and someone else. Have I got the energy to put myself in someone's shoes? Can I question to understand? If I've got elements or people in my life where there's friction or tension? What do I need to do to remove that negative energy? What are the conversations I need to have? So emotional energy is often about our relationships and how we relate to each other. Mental is often the focus. Can I stay focused on one thing at a time? There's some really interesting research coming through from neuroscience and neuroleadership at the moment as to the impact of the stimulation that we are continually bombarding our brains with, to the point that actually the physiology of the brain is being affected. And I was sharing last night, that there's 3 times in history where our brain has started to physically being shaped by the environment that we're in. First was the printing press. Suddenly we're now reading stories rather than orally telling stories. We've got the light bulb, where our circadian rhythms have been affected because we're now able to continue working throughout the daytime when it would normally be dark. And the third is technology. And what we're recognizing now is that the area of our brain that is concerned around focus is shrinking. We are finding it increasingly difficult to focus on one thing because we've got so many other stimulating texts, Facebook, computer, emails coming in, to the point that it's now being measured that we have between 40 and 45,000 pieces of information whizzing through our brains in any 24-hour period. Yeah, it's a lot of noise. Now, if we're going to effectively influence somebody else and understand what's going on for them, we need to slow down some of that repetitive thinking. Yeah. It's also been measured that we spend 48% of our time mentally somewhere else other than where we physically are. So we're spending a huge amount of time astrally traveling out the window, back to our desk. Yeah? So again, if we're wanting to maximize our energy, how do I stay present? If I'm really wanting to listen to understand somebody else, how do I put all of those thoughts to the back of my head so that I can be present with this person and hear what they're actually saying? Yeah? So what I'm going to invite you to do is I'm going to invite you to stand up. And I'm going to invite you to find somebody who you've not connected with yet, but you feel at some level you'd like to. And I'm going to ask you to have a paired share. When are you at your best? So what is in place? What rituals have you put in place to enable you to be at your best? What are you doing? Have you got habits in place? Do you know that if you get up without an alarm, for example, and you have time for your breakfast, and that you're organized enough that you know what's in the fridge for tea tonight, that you are a better version of yourself at work? So it's those kind of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual factors. And then we will come back together and we'll just share some of what we know needs to be in place for us to be at our best. So stand up. Find a new friend and have a share. When am I at my best? And a large part of it is recognizing what is it I can control and what can I influence for myself so that I feel energized in all 4 dimensions, no matter what's going on around me. Yeah, because some days, and I don't know about you, I haven't managed to find a way of controlling time yet. But I know some days things go really, really well. Yeah, and I achieve a lot, and I leave work at the end of that day. And how do my family experience me? Pretty well. Yeah, other days, exactly the same amount of time. But if things start off badly, if the alarm doesn't go off, if there's no milk in the fridge, if some idiot pulls in front of me in the traffic, and I get to work and I've got stress hormones coursing through my body, how does the rest of the day turn out? At times it means that we don't put in place the things that we know we need to be. So one of the concepts is think about it as energy management, not time management, being the fundamental currency of performance. Because I can actually control my energy if I'm aware of what it is I need. Yeah, and I'd certainly for the couple of people I was sharing with when we had that discussion, it's about what are the rituals I know I need to have in place, whether that's making sure that I am organized, that I have time for breakfast, Did I connect with my partner? Yeah. What were some of the other things that you noticed for you were really important? Just shout them out. I'm sure we can hear without the mic. Sleep, yeah, really important. Sorry? Food, yeah, make healthy choices. Be aware of what you're putting in your mouth. The golden rule is, if you don't know what it is, don't eat it. Yeah? If the description on the box has so many chemicals in it and your grandmother wouldn't have recognized it as a food, I probably wouldn't put it in my mouth. So if you can eat as nature intended, chances are it's going to be a healthier choice. What else? Yeah, space for yourself. And that can be one of the biggest challenges when you've got commitments at home, you've got young kids or even teenage kids like I have. There's a period in the middle where you get some sleep, yeah, where you're not waiting up for them to get in and you're not being woken up when they're waking up. So, for those of you in those intermediate years, enjoy. But, it's how do we ensure that those things are in place? And we can control a lot of those. We can also control a lot more than I think we give credit for, our own mindset and our own emotional response to any situation. But let's face it, it is much easier to press pause and manage our emotional response if we've slept well, we're eating well, we've created space for ourselves, and we're getting some movement. We are designed to move. That doesn't mean you've got to join a gym, but even just getting 2 10-minute walks in a day will have a positive impact on your resilience and health. So in essence, we're wanting to be aware of what state we're in. Because when we're in an unresourceful state, the feelings we experience, are often around feeling pressured, we may be fearful of speaking out, bored, anxious, worried, angry, confused, frustrated. They're not resourceful states. They can alert us to things. I'm not saying that they're bad, but they're not resourceful. But being curious about our emotions gives us a huge wealth of information. So if we think about if I'm feeling angry, what's the root cause of anger? Fear is often part of it, but it's also about violation of rights. Often our internal chatter is, how dare you? So it alerts us, anger alerts us to usually quite strong beliefs. I'm only going to be angry if someone pushes in front of me if I believe that pushing in front of me is wrong. If I felt it was okay, I wouldn't be angry. Frustration. If you're feeling frustrated, how many of you have ever felt frustrated in your roles? So what's sitting underneath frustration? It's often mismatched expectations. I expected you to do this and you haven't. Or I expected this of myself and I haven't. So knowing that we're feeling frustrated helps us to think about, well, what do I need to do? I might need to change my expectations. I might need to communicate my expectations. I might need to question the other person as to what their expectations were. And just to pick another one, fear, anxiety, worry. Yes, they're not resourceful states. And often what they are alerting us to is we're doubting we've got the resources to cope. So one of the ways to think about fear, for example, is false evidence appearing real. Most of what we fear never happens. So where's the evidence I need to tell myself of when I've overcome something similar in the past? I run a lot of workshops with organizations going through change. The number one thing that stops people feeling comfortable moving through change is fear. And yet, if we look back on our whole lives at all the changes we've experienced, most people I'm working with have left home. Most. Or they've moved countries, or they've changed roles, or they've got married or divorced or had kids. And often we've got to bring that evidence to the fore so that we don't get caught up in an unresourceful state. Because we're far more effective when we're over this side. If I'm feeling confident, or I'm feeling curious, or I'm feeling excited, loved, successful, I'm going to be a much more effective person, and certainly a far more effective influencer. Any thoughts? Make sense? So the challenge we have is at times situations will create a strong response, and we need to be able to create some space so that we can press pause and do something about it, whether it's change our mindset or put in place an action to remove some of that emotion. But the number one thing is we need to be able to recognize the emotion. Yeah? Now, there's a very simple technique which is called name it to tame it. If you name the emotion, it instantly reduces the intensity of that emotion, because when you're in your emotional brain, that part of your brain has no capacity for language. So to name it, you've got to move into your rational brain, which reduces the intensity of the emotional brain. Yeah, so if you're sitting in a meeting and you're noticing a strong emotion, either say it to yourself, preferably not out loud. Emotional Tourette's isn't necessarily a positive. Or write it down, because as soon as you've either said it to yourself or written it down, it's lowered some of that intensity. And we want to spend more time in a resourceful state so that we can manage our mindset, which increases our performance and means we're going to get better results. Yep. So your attitude is like a price tag. Think of your attitude like a price tag. It shows how valuable you are. So how do we shift from feeling perhaps overwhelmed or feeling that we don't have a voice into feeling more confident and that we do have a voice? Well, the first thing we've got to recognize is, as I said earlier, some practical techniques where we're not thinking so much is useful, which is why taking some time for yourself can be really critical. A lot of evidence coming out of positive psychology, and this may well be part of Ava's presentation, is recognizing and appreciating what we have achieved, but also recognizing and appreciating some of the physiology around what our brain needs. And all the evidence is suggesting that your brain needs a break from busy, rational thinking brain wave activity at least every 2 hours. Yes, every 2 hours can you fit a 10-minute, either go for a coffee, have a chat, go for a walk around the block, do something that reduces that high thinking brainwave. And your brain almost has a recharge. Yeah? So stress plus relaxation increases capacity. Anyone ever done muscle building or training physically where you're wanting to improve your strength or your health? Nobody. Nobody at all. Well, if you think about building a muscle, you put some stress on the muscle and then you let the muscle relax. And that increases the capacity. Yeah? But stress plus stress plus stress doesn't increase capacity. So what are the rituals you need to build on a daily basis that enable you to be at your best? I just wanted to bring this up because there has now been recognition that there is a trait called attention deficit trait, which has the same symptoms as attention deficit disorder. The difference being this is rooted in the environment, whereas attention deficit disorder is physiological. And what it's showing is it's when we have feelings of overwhelm, of procrastination, symptoms can be, you've pressed the lift button, but it's not coming quick enough, so you keep pressing it. Anyone recognizing that they might have some of this trait? Yeah? The good news is it's actually very simple as to what we need to do to reduce it. And it's about what we're talking about here. It's about how do I foster positive emotions? Because positive emotions, spending time with people we enjoy being with, increases 2 neurotransmitters in your brain, dopamine and serotonin. Yeah? Your emotional brain and your rational brain need those neurotransmitters to communicate to each other effectively. So you generally are much calmer when you're in a happy mood, when you're with somebody who you feel good about. Yeah? We also need to take physical care in terms of sleep, eating, exercising. I heard some of you sharing that when you feel organized, when you've got systems in place, that helps you be at your best. Yeah? So, think about what are some of the positive rituals I need to build back in or I need to introduce so that I'm at my best. Otherwise, what happens is we have a stimulus. Something happens, or somebody says something, or the person you least want to see in your life is waiting at your office door. Yeah? And we react from a part of our brain often referred to as the amygdala. If we can create space, we can choose our response. So one of the key things about being more effective generally, not only in how we influence and how we understand others, is how do I create more space? Viktor Frankl was a survivor of Auschwitz. Some of you might have read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote a very small book, really sharing his story of what enabled him to survive Auschwitz when so many other people struggled and died. And it was his reason why. He wanted to survive so he could share the story, so that it wouldn't happen again. But in it, he's got this amazing quote, and it goes along the lines of between what happens to us. So between a stimulus and how we respond, we have a choice. Yeah? And in that space and that choice defines who we are. Yeah? So what we've got to start to recognize is no matter what happens to us, no matter what environment we're in, no matter how much objection we might be getting to what we're proposing, if we can press pause and choose how we respond, we're going to get a better result than if we react. And it comes down to how well we keep the interaction between the different parts of our brain. So you've got three parts to your brain. You've got your reptilian brain, which keeps you alive. Breathing, eating, sleeping, sex. If you're a crocodile, that's all you've got. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? So it's quite simple. We're not really aware of that part of our brain from a thinking perspective. We've got our emotional brain, which is our limbic system. Now this is where the fight, flight, freeze response sits. Yeah, this is where digestion is controlled. So there's often a strong correlation between emotion and our gut. It's also where we hold strong emotional memory. Yeah? So if you've had a bad experience, you remember it far more strongly than just a sort of rational, normal interaction. If I was to ask you how many of you can remember where you were when you first saw the images of the Twin Towers, or where you saw the Canterbury earthquake, most of us can go back to where we were at that time. Yeah? If I was to ask you, what did you have for dinner last Thursday? Can anyone remember? No. So we don't have the you can. Was it a...
We've just gone on the special diet, boiled chicken and boiled vegetables. My husband makes me
every Thursday night or every night of the week? Oh my God. Does it work for you? So there's a strong enough reason why you're doing it. Yeah. And you know, some of this comes back exactly to that. If you're going to start building healthy habits because you recognize that your energy is important in order for you to be successful, then when it starts to slip, just question again why. Why is it important? Because change takes quite a few repetitions. So the limbic system is the emotional part of your brain. The neocortex is the front part of this grey matter, but this is where your executive brain sits. This is where all your rational thinking, multitasking, strategic thinking is going on. And it's important for us to recognize, because when we think about fueling our brain, yeah, and we've already mentioned that fuel for the brain is positive emotion, sleep. It's also water. A lot of us are dehydrated. Your brain needs protein. The earlier you can get protein into your day, the better your brain will work. And yet most of us have our biggest source of protein when? Dinner. It's not that useful because your brain comes awake. Yeah? So see if you can get protein earlier into your day. And a steady supply of glucose. So what's often referred to as low GI. Carbohydrates, vegetables, brown rice, brown bread. It's a slower release energy. Now, why it's important is your limbic system hardly uses any fuel. It's like a little Prius. It just keeps going. Yeah? Your rational brain, your thinking brain, is like a Lamborghini. It uses heaps and heaps of that fuel. So if you're low on fuel, yeah, and you've not been sleeping, you've not been taking breaks, you've not had emotional engagement with someone, you're not eating regularly, your emotional brain keeps going, but your rational brain shuts down in terms of the connection between the two. Yeah? So the emotional brain doesn't now connect with the rational brain. And it communicates directly with your body, usually via your mouth. Yeah, so that's when we say or do something that we later regret. When are you most at risk of saying something or reacting in a way that you would think, oh? Is it at the end of the day? Off when you get home? Hangry? Yeah? So we have a duty to make sure that we look after ourselves if we are going to be at our best. And if you're going to influence effectively, given we've already identified that you need to have courage and you need to be calm and you need to be confident and you need to be able to understand what's important to the other person, you're going to be far more effective if you're feeling energized, focused, positive. Yeah? Any questions on the brain? Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd just like to take you through a very short exercise that will give you another tool, as well as the name it to tame it, to press pause. Yeah? So I'm going to invite you to just sit with your feet on the floor, flat on the floor. If we're breathing effectively, when you take a deep breath in, there should be a movement of your stomach out. It's called diaphragmatic breathing. So if you take a deep breath in, ideally what you're doing is you're filling your lungs, which push down on the diaphragm, which is that big sheet of muscle under your rib cage, which will push out on your stomach. If you're not getting a movement in your stomach, don't worry about that right now, but when you go to bed tonight, just lie down and see if you can relax and push the air down into your lungs so that you actually get the movement here, because a lot of us have got into the habit of what's called chest breathing. So when we breathe in, our shoulders go up. Yeah, the movement should be down here. Yeah? We're going to practice a slower breathing pattern than you would perhaps normally do. So I'm going to invite you to, first of all, rest your hands on your lap. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes. I'm just going to talk you through a slow, even breathing pattern and then ask you to find your own pattern and then add one more instruction. So we're going to breathe in for 3 and out for 5. So we're going to breathe in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. So see if you can find your own slow, even breathing rhythm. And don't worry if thoughts come in, just notice them, let them go, bring your attention back to your breath. And while keeping that slow, even breathing rhythm, I'd like you to think about somebody or something or a favourite place that you really care for, appreciate, or love. So it's a slow, even breath and a positive emotion. Thinking about somebody, something, or a favourite place that you really care for, appreciate, or love. And just allow yourself to rest in that place for the next few minutes. Okay, now keeping that slow breath and seeing if you can hold on to that positive feeling, just slowly start to bring yourself back into the room, open your eyes, a bit of a stretch, and just check in. How are you feeling? Who found it difficult? Did anyone find it challenging to slow the breath down? No? Sometimes it can be, because our norm is that we keep things fairly stressed, and as soon as we start to feel a bit more relaxed, it doesn't feel the norm, so we crank it up. Yeah, where's the next challenge? Better get a Coke or a V or a coffee or get myself back to what feels normal. The benefits of just a few minutes practice of being mindful and present and slowing down the breath is what it does is it reduces a lot of that busy brainwave activity. Yeah? And when we're feeling stressed, we often go into a really high beta brainwave. If we can lower beta, we can access the part of our brain that's involved with creativity, innovation, insight. We actually create the opportunity to tap into different brainwave states. And that's what meditation does. And mindfulness is in essence just being present in the moment. So is paying attention in a particular way. So just a practice of enabling yourself to have some time to slow things down can be very, very powerful. The other evidence that's come through, and I've done a lot of work over the last 10 years with an organisation called HeartMath. And HeartMath was set up by a couple of cardiac surgeons. And what they did research into, and are still doing over the last 30 years, is the role of the heart and how that impacts the brain. So some of you might have heard that there's a whole body of research now called multiple brain intelligence. Yeah, we've got neurons in our gut, we've got neurons in our heart, as well as neurons in our brain. The surgeons at HeartMath started to record and add, research to the fact that when they did a heart transplant, the recipient of the heart was often getting memory recall, food preferences directly related to the donor. Yeah. So we've got information. We've not got a little person, a little body in our heart sending us notes. But what we have got is we've got nervous information from our gut to our brain, from our heart to our brain. And we sort of talk about it, don't we? We say our gut call or our gut response or what's your heart telling you what to do. The impact from a managing stress perspective and harnessing our state is if you can get your heart rate into a calm, even rhythm through the breath, the messages from your heart to your brain is everything's okay, and you relax some of that high stress beta brainwave. Yeah? So think about not only naming the emotion to tame it, but also how do I build a practice of just slowing things down? And their research suggests if you can spend 10 minutes a day, preferably maybe even early evening, you build up, it's not a muscle, but it's a way of recognizing what calm feels like, so that when you need it, you can call on the breath. The positive emotion we've already said helps us to keep both parts of our brain connected. And it's much easier to stay in a calm breath when we're feeling positive. So you've got that additional anchor of whatever that image was, that person, that place. And what we end up with are some of these benefits. Mindfulness has been shown to have all of these benefits. What simpler way than through recognizing the importance of the breath and being present. And in terms of the impact on what's going on in the heart, this is the pattern that we see when we're feeling a negative emotion. Often our breathing is erratic, we're running high beta brainwave, and our heart rate variability is very, very jagged. Just through a slow, even breath and a positive emotion, we can create a much smoother sine curve, and those messages then being sent to the brain enable us to be much more mindful, calm, and present. So I've included the information of HeartMath in your takeaway. All of their information, I tend to use a piece of software when I'm working with particularly cynical groups who don't believe that anything like this exists. But all of their research is freely available. Most of the work they do is with kids with attention deficit, exam nerves, just ways where we can actually notice our state and manage it more effectively. Did any of you notice that you felt calmer? Yeah. The other interesting piece is that what they've shown is that when we are in a calm, positive state, that is the strongest electrical signal that we emit. And they've now measured that we can pick up on each other's electrical signals up to 3 meters away. So if you can go into any meeting, and if you're thinking about influencing, if you can go in a calm, positive state, you will impact the physiology of the other people in the room without them being aware of it. But your electrical signal is stronger than an erratic electrical signal. And sometimes you've had that expression, you can just feel the atmosphere in the room. Yeah, the brilliance of some of what's coming out of science now is that we're able to measure it. And there's a lot more things impacting us around electrical signals, which again is why most of us feel most restored when we're in nature. It's the only time we get away from bloody phones and electrical equipment, isn't it? So how do we create more space around that for ourselves? The last piece I just want to leave you with, and it wasn't intended that you'd have time to do this in this session, but when we think about influencing, I want to bring the best version of myself into any conversation that I'm having. So there's some questions I've just put in for you to, next time you have a bit of time to yourself, glass of your favourite wine, you just sit and do a bit of reflection. You know, what makes me feel alive? Who and what has influenced you? What's most important to you? Who are you influencing? Who are your thought leaders? You know, who do you admire? Who do you take notice of? What do you stand for? Who do you need to build stronger relationships with? And if you're going to influence, you want to have, you know, your own support crew. And think about not only who am I, but what is it I do, and what permission does that give me? So some of the other questions: what is the purpose of what I do? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Some of you might have come across Simon Sinek's YouTube clip. He's got a YouTube clip called The Golden Circles. It's worth looking at if you haven't seen it. And it's about people buy into why we do things, the purpose of why we do things. Yeah, not the what and the how. We engage with people from an emotional perspective. Why would I want to take on board your ideas? For who? What do I know about them? So what's the opportunity? Even if it's just one conversation, what's the opportunity I have? Even if it's just to influence a shift in mindset or to break down a belief that things can't be different. What do I want to influence? I mean, this was the hardest, I think, part of the journey when we were running the year-long Global Women's Programme was, well, what is the influence you want to make? What is the impact you want to create? We're not going to change the world, but what could I have impact around? What can I say about me that meets this opportunity? What gives me permission to have this conversation? And how come I can say it? Yeah, so this is that piece around who am I? What have I got to offer? What are the relationships I've got? The opportunity for me to influence. And I think breaking it down into smaller steps rather than feeling that we're going to have no impact. And in summary, you know, what are the skills and behaviours that I need to focus on in order to be a more effective influencer? This came from a leadership author in the States, but leaders with influence, they give when they don't have to. They care for others. They grow continuously. They live authentically. They empower others. They manage hardship. You know, we all have stuff we've got to overcome. And they serve with humility. You know, sometimes we've got to think about what is the end game and how do I buy into that. And just, you know, a quote from somebody who was a huge influence on my life. If you think you're too small to have an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito in the room. Yep. So thank you. There's some resources just around some of the work coming out from a resilience perspective, just a couple of pages in the back there. And there's links to some of the references I've made around some of those behaviours from an influence perspective. But I think if there's one thing to go away with, it's about I have to be really clear on what I need to be my best, to have any chance of influencing someone else. So thank you. Hopefully you've found some insights or some parts of this that have been really interesting to you. And I think you'll find the themes through the other presentations kind of link some of these principles. I think it's lunchtime.
It's lunchtime and we're back here at 12:40.
Thank you.